61 people, 4 states, $580 million in methamphetamine moved across the U.S.-Mexico border for more than a decade, hidden inside toilets nobody thought to check twice. By the time federal prosecutors finished reading the indictment out loud in a San Antonio courtroom, it ran 40 minutes, 61 names, 4 states, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio. Bank accounts frozen. A ceramics company gutted down to its filing cabinets, and the entire case, every wiretap, every surveillance van, every raid that hit warehouses in 4 cities on the same morning, traced back to one number on one invoice that didn't add up. 41 pounds. That's the whole thing. 41 pounds too heavy on a shipment of 900 toilets that should have weighed exactly what 900 toilets weigh. Not 1 ounce more. Nobody was supposed to notice. For 11 years, nobody had. This is the story of how a family ceramics business outside Monterey became the delivery system for one of CJNG's most undetectable smuggling routes through South Texas, and how a night shift analyst who refused to round a number up brought the entire pipeline down. The World Trade Bridge sits on the western edge of Laredo, Texas. 4 lanes of commercial traffic each direction. More freight crosses there in a single day than moves through most American seaports in a week. Over 16,000 trucks daily, according to Customs and Border Protection's own crossing data. Officers at the bridge don't search everything. They can't. They sort cargo by risk, and they learn the categories fast. Electronics get a second look, because electronics hide compartments well. Produce gets weighed against known tear weights, because a truckload of onions with a hollow floor is one of the oldest tricks on the border. Auto parts get flagged when the manifest and the load don't match down to the part number. Even something as ordinary as bottled water gets a periodic random pull because a pallet of water is dense enough to mask a lot of things if nobody ever bothers to check. Sanitary ceramics, toilets, sinks, bidets, floor tile, sat at the bottom of that list. Dense, heavy, cheap per unit relative to its weight, and solid straight through, fired clay from one glazed surface to the other, nothing hollow for a dog to smell into or an X-ray operator to question. A shipment of 900 porcelain toilets isn't unusual cargo on that bridge. It's Tuesday. Officers working the primary inspection lanes told investigators, once the case broke, that a load of sanitary ware almost never earned more than a cursory glance at the paperwork and a visual check that the seal hadn't been tampered with. It simply wasn't the kind of cargo that rewarded the extra 5 minutes. That reputation belonged to a company called Cerámicas Reyes del Norte, a family sanitary ware exporter founded outside Monterey in 1987 by a bricklayer named Arnulfo Reyes, who built his first kiln by hand and sold sinks out of a rented lot before the business grew into one of the larger ceramics exporters serving the Texas market. By the fall of 2023, when federal agents quietly opened a file on the company, it was run day-to-day by Arnulfo's grandson, Ivan Reyes, 29 years old, a business school graduate who sponsored a youth soccer club in Nuevo Laredo and drove a leased pickup truck with the company logo stenciled on the door. DEA had run the company through its databases twice in the previous 6 years. Clean both times. No hits. No informant had ever named the Reyes family in connection with anything. That cleanliness wasn't an accident. It was the whole design. I spent a long stretch going through the case file for this one, and a single line in a customs broker's paperwork kept nagging at me before I understood why it mattered. It's the detail this entire case turns on, and it's not dramatic at all. It's a rounding error. At the CBP National Targeting Center's regional intake desk in Laredo, an intelligence analyst named Renata Ibarra worked the overnight shift cross-referencing manifests against shipping records for anomalies, a job that mostly produces nothing, because most freight is exactly what it says it is. Ibarra had been doing that shift for 4 years by then, the kind of assignment junior analysts rotate through and senior ones avoid. Hours from 11 at night to 7 in the morning spent alone with a dual monitor setup and a database that updated in real time as trucks queued at the bridge. Colleagues described her as meticulous to the point of being teased for it. She kept her own personal spreadsheet of unit weights for the exporters she saw most often, cross-referenced against manufacturer catalogs, something no one had asked her to build and nobody else on the shift bothered to maintain. On the night of September 12, 2023, Ibarra was reconciling a routine shipment from Ceramicas Reyes del Norte. 900 standard two-piece toilets, declared gross weight 38,700 pounds. She ran the math against the manufacturer's published unit weight, a number she'd cross-checked before on prior loads from the same exporter. 900 units at the declared per-unit weight should have come to 38,659 pounds. The manifest said 38,700, a difference of 41 pounds. 41 pounds, spread across 900 units, is roughly 45 grams per toilet. Most analysts would have rounded it into shipping tolerance and moved to the next file. Packing material varies. Pallets vary. Humidity changes glaze weight by fractions of a percent. Ibarra didn't round it. She flagged it, wrote a 2-paragraph memo, and routed it to FBI San Antonio's Border Corruption and Narcotics Squad, expecting, by her own later testimony, absolutely nothing to come of it. Something did. Special Agent Laura Whitfield picked up the referral in October 2023. She'd spent 6 years working cartel financial cases out of the San Antonio field office, and her first instinct was that the memo was noise. 41 pounds is nothing, and Ceramicas Reyes del Norte had 11 years of clean crossings behind it. But she pulled the company's full crossing history anyway. 4 years back, every manifest CBP had on file. And the anomaly wasn't a one-time fluke. It was consistent. Not every shipment. Roughly 1 load in 3 carried a declared weight between 30 and 50 pounds over the calculated baseline. The other 2/3 of the shipments were dead accurate. That inconsistency was the tell. A scale error is constant. A packing variance drifts randomly in both directions. What Whitfield was looking at moved in one direction only, and only sometimes, which meant somebody was making a choice on certain loads and not others. The FBI opened a full investigation in November 2023, running it jointly with DEA Houston once a second location entered the picture. Because whatever was happening to that 41 pounds wasn't happening in Laredo. The toilets crossed the bridge sealed, factory fresh, still shrink-wrapped to their pallets. Whatever was inside them had to already be inside them before they ever left Mexico. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. You can't hide contraband inside a solid ceramic object. There's no cavity, no false bottom, no compartment to drill and reseal. Every prior case involving toilets and border smuggling, and there have been a handful over the decades, used the water tank, the one hollow space in the fixture, stuffed with wrapped bricks of product and resealed with matching porcelain-look epoxy. Canines are trained for that specific method now. Scanners look for it too. It's a known trick, and known tricks get caught. This wasn't that. Agents pulled and X-rayed a sample toilet from a prior shipment, one that had already crossed months earlier and sat in a Houston distributor's warehouse. No tank anomaly, no cavity, no epoxy seam. The X-ray came back as a normal, solid, vitrified ceramic body, exactly what 900 pounds of fired clay is supposed to look like on a scanner. Density readings were uniform across the entire piece, which is precisely why nothing had ever flagged it. Scanners are built to catch irregularity, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, a void, a seam. This toilet had none of that. The anomaly, if there was one, was distributed evenly through the entire object, and evenly distributed density doesn't read as an anomaly at all. It reads as consistency. It took DEA's Houston chemistry lab 3 weeks and a destructive test, physically pulverizing a sample toilet in a hydraulic press, to find out why. The lab work itself is worth sitting with for a second. because it's slower and stranger than it sounds on paper. The forensic chemist who ran point on the sample, a 14-year DEA veteran named Marcus Delgado, has since described the assignment to colleagues as the most unusual submission of his career. A full, intact toilet arriving in an evidence crate with a chain of custody form that read, without irony, 1-1 sanitary fixture, suspected narcotics. Delgado's team first ran the standard suite, surface swabs, ion mobility spectrometry along the glaze. Nothing. The surface was clean, because whatever was inside had never touched the surface. It was only after a supervisor half-joked about running it like a geological core sample that the team switched approaches, sectioning the piece with a diamond-tipped saw, then reducing sequential slices to powder for solvent extraction. The first 2 slices, taken from the rim and the base, came back negative. It was a slice from the dead center of the tank wall, the thickest cross-section of fired clay in the entire object, that finally returned a positive hit for methamphetamine at a concentration high enough to rule out any possibility of contamination. Delgado told investigators afterward that if they'd sectioned the piece differently, taken slices only from the outer surface the way a normal contraband search would, they might have missed it entirely and closed the sample out clean. The porcelain itself had been engineered. Before the raw clay slip went into the mold, someone had blended liquid methamphetamine oil directly into the slurry, along with a chemical binder meant to survive the ceramic firing process without fully burning off. Cast, dried, glazed, and fired at industrial kiln temperatures, the finished toilet looked, weighed, and scanned like any other. The drug wasn't hidden inside the object. The drug was the object, distributed through millions of individual grains of fired clay, at a concentration low enough per unit that no single toilet would trip a threshold. But the volume of 900 units per container made the math work for whoever knew how to get it back out on the other end. Recovering it required grinding the entire fixture down to powder and running an extraction, acetone baths, filtration, recrystallization, a process that would look to anyone walking past a storefront exactly like a tile and countertop shop running routine stone-cutting equipment. That storefront existed. DEA found it in January 2024. A strip mall unit in southwest Houston operating under the name Lone Star Bath Liquidators, wedged between a nail salon and a check-cashing store on a stretch of Bissonnet Street that saw more foot traffic from the taqueria next door than from actual customers. Financial records later obtained by warrant showed the business had sold, by its own point-of-sale system, 4 toilets in 14 months of operation. 4. It kept the lights on, paid rent on time, and never once looked at its own bottom line because retail was never the business. The rock crusher in the back room was? Agents watched the location for 5 months before they understood what they were looking at. The surveillance itself was as unglamorous as investigative work gets. 2 agent rotations working out of a rented office above a mattress store across the street, and later out of a plumber's unmarked service van parked on a residential block with sightlines down the strip mall's rear alley. Shifts ran 12 hours, swapped at dawn and dusk, logging every vehicle that so much as slowed near the loading door. Agents burned through more coffee and fast food than anyone wanted to put on an expense report, and for long stretches nothing happened at all. Just the nail salon's regulars, the check-cashing line on the 1st and 15th of the month, a stray cat that took up residence behind the dumpster and became enough of a fixture that 2 different surveillance logs mention it by a nickname the team gave it. A panel van would arrive roughly every 3 weeks, always at a different time, always backed directly up to the loading door. 2 men would unload wooden crates. The van would leave empty within 40 minutes. Nothing about it looked like a drug operation. It looked like restocking. Agents logged the panel van's plate on its 9th pass and ran it through the state rental registry, only to find it leased under a shell company with no other footprint in any database. A dead end that underscored just how deliberately the network had insulated itself at every layer, down to the vehicle that made the deliveries. One agent on the rotation later said the hardest part of those 5 months wasn't the boredom of the stakeout itself, but the discipline of sitting on a hunch without probable cause to act on it, watching the same routine repeat week after identical week and doing nothing but writing it down. For most of that surveillance window, agents had nothing they could act on. A rock crusher isn't illegal. A panel van isn't probable cause. Whitfield's team needed to physically prove what was leaving. That strip mall was methamphetamine, and they couldn't get inside without burning 5 months of patient surveillance on a search warrant that a defense attorney could later argue was based on nothing but a hunch about bathroom fixtures. They solved it the unglamorous way: trash pulls. Twice a week for 6 weeks, agents collected the shop's dumpster contents on public curb property. No warrant required, usually well before sunrise, so the collection wouldn't be noticed from the strip mall's second-floor apartments. Most of what came back was ordinary commercial trash: nail salon packaging that had drifted over from next door, fast food wrappers, shredded paperwork that turned out to be nothing more than expired coupon flyers. On the 4th pull in March 2024, a discarded filter cloth tested positive for methamphetamine residue at a concentration high enough to rule out accidental contamination. That was the anchor. That was the piece of paper a judge could sign. The distribution side of the case took shape almost as slowly. Toll records and license plate reader data pulled under warrant traced outbound vehicles from the Houston location along 3 separate corridors: Interstate 10 toward Atlanta, Interstate 20 toward Charlotte, and a less direct route through Interstate 40 toward Columbus, Ohio. Local task force partners in each city independently confirmed methamphetamine surges in their markets over the prior 18 months, price drops that suggested a new high-volume supplier had entered without the usual turf violence that normally accompanies a new player. That absence of violence was itself telling. CJNG wasn't fighting for territory. It was quietly outcompeting on price and purity, because its supply chain had almost no interdiction losses to price into the product. Put yourself in Whitfield's position for a second. You've confirmed the method. You've confirmed the recovery site. You've got 3 outbound distribution corridors reaching 3 other states. And you still don't have the one thing that makes a case like this prosecutable at the scale it deserves: proof of who's making the decisions in Mexico, and proof that connects the ceramics company's ownership to the cartel, rather than just to an unwitting factory being used without its knowledge. That question sat unresolved for months. It would take a different kind of investigator, working an entirely different case, to answer it. By April 2024, the Joint Task Force had built enough for court-authorized wiretaps on 3 phones tied to the Houston recovery operation. What the wiretaps caught in the first 2 weeks confirmed the scale of what agents were dealing with. But it would take a phone that nobody on the task force had put under surveillance, seized almost by accident during an unrelated arrest 600 miles away in Jalisco, to finally show them who was really running the supply side. 600 miles southwest of the Houston Strip Mall, in the Pottery District of Tlaquepaque, Jalisco, a neighborhood that has produced hand-thrown ceramics for export since the 18th century and is, on paper, one of the most legitimate craft industries in the state. A kiln operator named Efrain Solis had been firing an unusual batch recipe for 6 years without ever asking who ordered it or why the slip formula changed slightly from load to load. Solis wasn't Cartel. He was a foreman with 4 kids and a mortgage, paid in cash bonuses on top of his regular wage whenever a particular client's orders came through, told only that the additive was a proprietary glazing compound the client didn't want copied by competitors. He mixed what he was told to mix, fired what he was told to fire, and moved on. CJNG's chemistry side, according to what agents would later piece together from lab analysis and a cooperating chemist's proffer statement, was run by a man DEA's Jalisco liaison office had tracked for years under the alias El Químico, real name Rogelio Camarena, believed to hold a chemistry degree from a university in Guadalajara before he disappeared into the cartel's production network sometime around 2016. Camarena's contribution wasn't cooking meth in the traditional sense. It was solving the specific chemistry problem of how to bind methamphetamine oil into a ceramic slip in a way that would survive a kiln firing at roughly 200 degrees Celsius without fully degrading. A formulation problem that took, according to lab notebooks later recovered in a raid, more than 2 years of failed batches before Camarena's team found a stabilizing compound that worked reliably. Here's what strikes me about that detail. 2 years of research and development run with the seriousness of an actual industrial chemistry lab to solve a smuggling problem, because the payoff on the other end was worth it. Once the formula worked, it worked for 11 years without a single seizure. That's not luck. That's return on investment, calculated the same way any legitimate manufacturer calculates it. Most people assume a cartel supply chain runs on intimidation and brute force at every link. This one didn't need to. It ran on the same quiet, boring incentive structures that keep any business running. Steady pay, plausible cover stories, and nobody asking questions they didn't need answered. Here's what this tells you about how these networks actually survive as long as they do. It isn't the shootouts and convoys people picture. It's a foreman in Tlaquepaque who never saw a gram of finished product, a shop clerk in Houston who sold 4 toilets on the books, and a young man in Nuevo Laredo who sponsored a youth soccer team with money he could tell himself came from a real, functioning ceramics business. Because on the surface, it was one. Every level of this operation was built so that almost everyone inside it could plausibly not know, or not have to know, what the rest of it was for. Wiretaps on the Houston phones eventually connected to a 4th number, a Mexican cell registered to a shell company, and that number connected, through call pattern analysis rather than direct evidence at first, to Ivan Reyes personally. Not to the company generally, to him. Agents intercepted a call in June 2024 in which Reyes, speaking to a logistics contact about an upcoming shipment, used the phrase, "Same weight as always, don't let them round it different this time." A sentence that meant nothing out of context and everything once agents understood what they were listening to. He knew about the 41 pounds. He was managing it, load by load, personally. That call didn't just implicate Reyes. It closed the open question the case had been sitting on for months. The family patriarch, Arnulfo Reyes, now 78 and largely retired from daily operations, appeared nowhere on the wiretaps discussing product, weight, or shipments. Only ordinary grandfatherly calls about his grandson's soccer sponsorships and a dispute with a supplier over glaze pigment pricing. Whether he knew what his grandson had built inside the company he founded would become one of the sharper disputes at trial. But the operational control, the wiretaps made clear, sat with Ivan. Agents now had the method, the recovery site, 3 distribution corridors, and a name in Mexico connected by his own words to the exact anomaly that started the case. What they didn't yet have was the full distribution network on the U.S. side, who was receiving product in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Columbus, and whether those cells were CJNG controlled directly or operating as independent buyers. That answer came from a source nobody on the task force had cultivated. It came from a woman who walked into the Atlanta DEA field office on her own in August 2024 and asked to speak to someone about her boyfriend. Her name is withheld in the public record, identified in court filings only as a cooperating witness. She'd been dating a man connected to the Atlanta receiving cell for 8 months, unaware for most of that time what he actually did for work. What made her come forward wasn't a crisis of conscience about drug trafficking in the abstract. It was smaller and more human than that. She'd found a duffel bag of cash in a closet, confronted him, and he'd told her casually that if she ever talked to police, he'd have her handled, a threat specific enough and calm enough that she believed him completely. She went to DEA the next morning. What she described to agents Once they'd walked her through an initial interview in a windowless room meant to feel less like an interrogation than a conversation, was a relationship that had started ordinarily enough. He'd told her he worked in logistics and equipment resale, which was, in its own twisted way, not even a lie. She described unexplained week-long absences, a second phone he kept in the glove box of his truck and never brought inside, and a habit of counting cash at the kitchen table with the blinds drawn that she'd talked herself into believing was gambling winnings for longer than she now likes to admit. Agents who sat in on that interview later noted that she cried only once, when asked whether she thought he'd ever actually hurt her, and answered that she didn't know, and that not knowing was worse than being sure. Her information was limited but exact. She knew addresses, she knew first names and approximate delivery schedules. She didn't know the ceramics angle at all. Nobody on the receiving end did, which was itself confirmation of how tightly compartmentalized the operation was. But her information, combined with the toll records the task force already had, let agents finally map full addresses in all 3 receiving cities: a self-storage facility outside Atlanta, an auto repair shop in Charlotte used as a cover for repackaging, and a residential property in Columbus, where product was cut and distributed to street-level networks. By September 2024, the task force had watched 14 full container shipments cross the World Trade Bridge without intervening, tracking each one from the Nuevo Laredo factory floor through customs, through the Houston recovery shop, and out along the distribution corridors to confirmed receiving locations in all 3 cities. 14 shipments they let pass, each one carrying an estimated 220 pounds of recoverable methamphetamine, because moving too early on any single load would have tipped the network and lost the ability to indict the network as a whole rather than a handful of low-level couriers. That's a brutal number to sit with, honestly. 14 loads, roughly 3,000 pounds of methamphetamine that agents watched enter the country and chose not to stop, because stopping it would have cost them the case that could actually shut the whole pipeline down. Whitfield has said publicly, in a court hearing after the fact, that it was the hardest operational call of her career, knowing exactly what was inside a shipment crossing the bridge in front of her and choosing to let it through anyway, 4 separate times a month, for months. Would you have made that call, knowing every pound you let cross was going to end up on a street somewhere in Georgia, North Carolina, or Ohio before you ever got to close the case? There's a quieter cost to those 14 loads that rarely makes it into the coverage of a case like this, and it's worth pausing on. Somewhere in that surveillance window, a portion of those toilets weren't recovered at all before reaching retail. They shipped straight through the Houston distributor's normal wholesale channel and ended up installed in ordinary homes. Their embedded product never extracted because the network's own recovery capacity couldn't keep pace with everything crossing the bridge. In one case that surfaced only after the raid, a family outside Marietta, Georgia, who'd bought a bundle of fixtures for a bathroom remodel in early 2024, opened their front door 8 months later to find federal agents on the porch asking, with as much delicacy as the situation allowed, to remove and test their downstairs toilet. The homeowner, a school teacher who agreed to speak to a local reporter on condition her name not be used, said agents were polite, almost apologetic, and left her with a claim number and a business card and a working toilet loaned from an evidence locker so her family wouldn't be without a bathroom for the week it took to get a straight answer out of anyone about what, if anything, had actually been in the one they took. Nothing was ever detected in her fixture. It came from a clean batch, tested negative, and was eventually returned. But she told the reporter that for months afterward, she found herself thinking about it every time she used her own bathroom, and that nobody from any agency involved ever quite managed to explain to her satisfaction how she was supposed to have known. The unpopular part of this story is that letting those 14 loads through was almost certainly the right operational decision, and it still means real product reached real people during those months. Law enforcement math doesn't get to be clean. Every wiretap investigation like this one runs on the same trade, and most viewers never hear the version of the story where the delay is the strategy working, not the strategy failing. Whitfield's team set the operational trigger for Shipment 19, not because 19 was special, because by early October 2024, they had what they needed on every link in the chain. The Tlaquepaque kiln records tying Camarina's formula to specific batch dates, the wiretap connecting Reyes to the weight anomaly by name, the trash pull evidence from Houston, and full surveillance packages on all 3 receiving cities. Waiting longer only risked losing the window. CJNG networks reorganize, people get nervous, cells relocate. 19 shipments in, the case was as strong as it was going to get without pushing luck further. October 22, 2024. A cold front had pushed through South Texas the night before, dropping temperatures into the low 40s, unusual enough for the season that agents on the pre-dawn surveillance team remember commenting on it over the radio. At the World Trade Bridge, Shipment 19 crossed customs inspection at 6:14 a.m., flagged internally by CBP as a routine pass-through per the ongoing operational agreement with FBI and DEA, its container tracked by GPS the entire route north toward the Houston recovery site. Agents let it reach the strip mall, let the crew inside begin unloading, and at 9:40 a.m., tactical teams moved on 5 locations simultaneously: the Houston Recovery Shop, the Atlanta Storage Facility, the Charlotte Auto Shop, the Columbus Residential Property, and 600 miles south, in coordination with Mexican federal authorities, the Ceramicas Reyes del Norte manufacturing plant outside Monterrey. Agents in Houston came through the strip mall's rear loading door in tactical vests, AR-15 rifles raised, thermal imaging confirming 2 occupants still inside the back room where the rock crusher sat mid-cycle. A stack of freshly ground porcelain dust piled beside it that field tested positive within minutes. Both men inside surrendered without resistance. One of the 2 men taken into custody at the strip mall, a 34-year-old clerk named Danilo Ochoa, who'd been hired 18 months earlier through a classified ad promising light equipment operation, cash paid weekly, spent much of his post-arrest interview insisting the crusher processed tile scrap for a recycling contract. Agents let him talk for nearly 40 minutes before laying the field test results from the dust beside his workstation on the table in front of him. He went quiet, then asked whether the 4 toilets he'd actually sold to real customers would count against him more than the ones that never left the building. It wasn't the question investigators expected, and it said plenty about how little of the operation's real scale had ever reached the people running its ground floor. In Atlanta, agents recovered 41 pounds of finished crystal methamphetamine from the storage unit, a number that, when Whitfield read it off the inventory sheet that afternoon, she has said made her stop and sit down for a second, because it was the exact same number, 41, that had opened the entire case 13 months earlier. Coincidence, statistically. It didn't feel like one to anyone on the team that day. In Charlotte, the auto repair shop yielded a cutting operation mid-run, digital scales, pressing equipment, and a ledger, handwritten, that agents would later use to corroborate distribution volumes across the whole network. The entry team there described the shop as almost theatrically ordinary from the front. 2 customer cars up on lifts, and a radio playing in the waiting area, with the actual operation running out of a back bay behind a door marked "Employees Only" that took a battering ram and 11 seconds to breach. Columbus produced the smallest haul but the most arrests, 7 people taken into custody at the residential property, 3 of them found with loaded firearms within reach. South of the border, Mexican federal police, working from intelligence the Joint Task Force had shared through formal liaison channels in the weeks prior, moved on the Monterrey plant at roughly the same hour. Ivan Reyes was taken into custody at the facility itself, reportedly attempting to reach a vehicle in the employee parking lot when officers intercepted him. Arnulfo Reyes, the 78-year-old founder, was located at his home in Monterrey and detained without incident. Rogelio Camarena, El Químico, was not at the Tlaquepaque facility that morning. He remains, as of this recording, a fugitive, believed by DEA's Jalisco Liaison Office to be somewhere in the state. protected by remaining CJNG infrastructure that survived the takedown of the smuggling arm specifically. Efrain Solis, the kiln foreman who had fired the formula for 6 years, was detained during the plant raid and cooperated almost immediately. His interview with Mexican federal investigators, portions of which later entered the U.S. case file through formal cooperation channels, ran nearly 5 hours across 2 sessions. By the account of an investigator present, Solis spent the first hour insisting, calmly and repeatedly, that he had done nothing but glazing work, before an investigator laid out the batch records recovered from the plant's own office. Records showing his signature on delivery logs tied to specific dates that matched, almost to the day, shipments. Federal agents on the U.S. side had already flagged as anomalous. Solis went quiet for several minutes after that, according to the investigator's notes, and then asked, not defensively, but as though he genuinely wanted to know, whether the bonuses he'd been paid over 6 years would now be treated as though he'd known all along. He said he had never once seen the finished product his kiln work made possible. He fired ceramic. He never saw meth. 6 years of steady bonus pay, and he genuinely did not understand in any concrete sense what he had been part of building until federal agents explained it to him in an interrogation room. That's not a defense. It's not meant to be. But it's the detail that makes this case different from the version people expect when they hear cartel meth smuggling. There was no gunfight, no cash counted at a stash house with masked men standing guard. Just a man at a kiln, doing his job, 6 years running. The full accounting, once DEA's Houston lab finished processing everything seized across the 5 simultaneous raids, plus the 14 shipments retroactively estimated from surveillance data, came to 4,100 individual ceramic units, either intercepted in the 19th shipment or recovered in partial form from prior loads still sitting in distributor inventory across 3 states. From those units, chemists extracted 1.9 tons of crystal methamphetamine, just under 3,800 pounds, at a DEA-calculated street value of $580 million based on regional pricing across the 4 affected markets. Back at the Houston lab, technicians spent the better part of 2 days simply logging what the raids had produced. Sealed evidence bags weighed, photographed, and barcoded one at a time, each ceramic fragment cross-referenced against the shipment manifest. It came from before a single gram went into an extraction bath. It was, by DEA's own account, the largest single ceramic embedded evidence intake the Houston Field Division had ever processed, and the paperwork alone would end up running to several thousand pages by the time prosecutors finished building the exhibit list for trial. 61 people were named in the federal indictment unsealed in San Antonio in December 2024. Ivan Reyes faces charges including continuing criminal enterprise and international drug importation, exposing him to a potential life sentence if convicted on the top count. Arnulfo Reyes was charged with a narrower set of counts tied to corporate oversight and money laundering, reflecting prosecutors' own uncertainty about how much operational knowledge the founder actually had, a distinction his defense team has already signaled it will lean on heavily at trial. Camarena remains charged in absentia. Solis, in exchange for his cooperation, is expected to face a significantly reduced charge under Mexican federal law, an outcome that has drawn some public criticism in Jalisco from people who feel a foreman who fired the product for 6 years shouldn't walk away with a fraction of the sentence facing the men who never touched a kiln. I'll say the part that'll probably draw some pushback. I don't think Solis belongs anywhere near the same sentencing conversation as Reyes or Camarena, but 6 years is 6 years. At some point, I didn't ask questions, stops being ignorance and starts being a choice not to know. He's not the villain of this story. He's also not nothing. The receiving cells fared worse across the board. Of the 7 arrested in Columbus, 5 have already accepted plea agreements as of this recording, cooperating in exchange for reduced sentencing recommendations. The Charlotte Auto Shop's owner, identified in court filings only by his role as the cell's logistics manager, was denied bail after prosecutors successfully argued flight risk given his dual citizenship and history of unexplained international travel. In Atlanta, prosecutors are pursuing forfeiture of a residential property purchased in 2022 for $640,000 in cash, a purchase that, on its own, should have triggered a suspicious activity report and somehow didn't. Cerámicas Reyes del Norte, the company itself, has effectively ceased operations. Its export license was suspended by Mexican customs authorities within a week of the raid, and asset forfeiture proceedings on both sides of the border have frozen everything from the company's bank accounts to the youth soccer club sponsorship that had put its logo on 40 children's jerseys in Nuevo Laredo for 3 straight seasons. The club's coach told a local reporter he found out where the sponsorship money had actually come from the same morning everyone else did, watching the raid coverage on the news. That detail sits uncomfortably with me, and I don't think there's a clean way to resolve it. None of those kids did anything wrong. Their jerseys had a drug network's logo on them for 3 years, and nobody involved in running that youth league had any way of knowing that, because the entire point of the company's respectability was that it looked from every angle a normal person would check, completely legitimate. CBP has since changed its risk-scoring model for sanitary ceramics shipments crossing South Texas ports of entry, adding randomized density consistency testing to a category that had previously been treated as close to zero risk. Agency officials, speaking to industry trade press rather than in a formal statement, acknowledged that the uniform density blind spot this case exposed likely affected risk models at other ports handling similar cargo, and a review is reportedly underway to determine whether other ceramics exporters, unrelated to this case, have been examined more closely as a result. What gets me about this case, more than the number of arrests or the dollar figure, is how long the method worked because it relied on nobody's suspicion rather than anybody's silence. 11 years. Not because anyone was paid to look away. There's no evidence in the case file that a single CBP officer, broker, or inspector took a bribe to let these shipments through. It worked because the product was engineered to be genuinely chemically unremarkable to every detection method built to catch something else. That's a different kind of failure than corruption, and in some ways it's a harder one to guard against, because you can't investigate your way out of a blind spot you don't know you have. Would this case have ever opened if Renata Ibarra had rounded 41 pounds into shipping tolerance that night in September 2023, the way most analysts reasonably would have? Nobody can answer that with certainty. What's on the record is that the anomaly had been sitting in CBP's own crossing data for years before anyone flagged it, visible in hindsight to any analyst who ran the same comparison she did. It just took someone deciding a 45-gram discrepancy per toilet was worth 2 paragraphs of her night. Ibarra has since been reassigned to a specialized unit built specifically around the kind of pattern analysis that caught this case, one of the direct organizational changes CBP made in its aftermath. She's declined public interviews, but colleagues describe her, according to reporting from a regional outlet that covered the case closely, as someone who still double-checks manifest math manually, even when the system auto-clears it. Whitfield's task force has already opened 2 follow-on investigations examining whether the porcelain embedding method identified in this case has been adapted for other categories of dense, uniform export cargo, decorative concrete, cast stone, kiln-fired industrial components, categories that share the exact blind spot that let this network run for over a decade. Those cases remain open. What agents find there, if anything, hasn't been made public. We cut a few details from this story for time, including the specifics of how Camarena's stabilizing compound actually worked at the chemical level, which DEA has kept partially redacted even in unsealed court filings, reportedly to avoid publishing something close to a recipe. If you've seen anything credible about how that part of the case developed, or where the search for Camarena stands now, we read the comments on these videos, and we'd genuinely like to know if there's more here than what's made it into the public record. Sentencing for Iván Reyes is scheduled for early 2026. Federal prosecutors have indicated they'll seek a sentence near the top of the guideline range, citing the scale, the duration, and what they've characterized in filings as a deliberate, sustained effort to exploit a specific gap in border inspection methodology rather than a single opportunistic smuggling attempt. His defense has signaled it will argue the opposite framing entirely, that Reyes inherited an operation his grandfather built and was, in their words, managing a family business under coercion from cartel figures who'd embedded themselves in the company before he ever took it over. Whether a jury believes that version is going to be the whole trial. What do you think? Does Ivan Reyes read as a man who built this himself, or a third-generation heir who got handed a company already compromised and made his own choices about what to do with it? The wiretap, where he's managing the weight discrepancy, personally suggests one answer. His defense is going to argue for the other. That's the actual fight this case comes down to, underneath the seizure numbers and the raid footage. 11 years, 19 shipments allowed to run before the takedown. 450 grams of methamphetamine oil, roughly, baked into porcelain that thousands of ordinary families in 3 American states installed in their bathrooms without the faintest idea what they were bolting to their floors. 61 indictments, $580 million, and the whole case built on a night shift analyst who looked at 41 extra pounds and decided that wasn't nothing. If this is the kind of investigation you want more of, the cases where the break isn't a shootout but a spreadsheet, subscribe and stick around. We're already deep into the follow-on cases this one opened, and there's more coming.